So I'm here with
James Swinson, and I'm the course leader for Research Pathway on the MA in Academic Practice, and historically that's been 2 units, one of which is, I think that primarily I would talk about today, is Research as an Academic Practice.
James, can you tell us the aspirations you have for the unit then that you want to discuss today?
Okay, so the unit was really put together 4 years ago now. It's been running for 3 years, and it was really came out of this idea of an early career researcher. So it's this postdoctoral, people who are considered to be postdoctoral, so they've all got their PhDs. Although given the nature of our institution, there's a bit of latitude around that. Quite a bit of latitude for people who've been in the institution for quite a while and already had a bit of a research profile. So the aspiration was really to help people to develop their profile, their research profile, and see different ways in doing that, and also to plan. And the plan sort of falls into this 5-year pattern, which is to a degree dictated by the REF, the research audit, that happens on a 5-yearly basis, a bit like the Olympics or something. But anyway, so it was really preparing people to see how they could tailor their research ideas and to that deadline, and it also prepared them for a meeting that every researcher has with the Associate Dean of Research in the college.
And how does the design of the unit sort of address these aspirations or meet these aspirations?
Well, the thing is that it was in terms of the course was unique in a sense in that people already had a lot of the evidence that they needed for planning, and to bring those, to recognise the resources that they had, and to bring them together, and also to have a space to rough out plans and so on. So in terms of their kind of so the obvious choice was out, which I'd already worked with a little bit, was workflow. To develop an e-portfolio, and that seemed ideal because most of the documents or material people had would be in forms that could be uploaded to workflow. So that would include things like abstracts from conferences, conference papers, evidence of exhibitions, their profile, their practice if they were practice-based, and so on. So a lot of the planning that they had to do, the exercises we gave people to do, which were diagrammatic in many cases, in order to look at the balance between their the work-life balance was one of the aspirations that came up, and so on. And we also used, we sort of piggybacked slightly on an already pre-existing planning system for researchers, which is this VTI system.
Could you tell a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, well, the VTI plan. VTI is a sort of organisation that was financed and supported by universities across Britain, and with the idea of what came out of that was this sort of wheel that's a plan of these different aspects of a researcher's career, and then a kind of grid that allowed you, from that wheel related to a grid, where you could look and see these different aspects of qualities that you might require or skills that you might need, and so on. So you could assess yourself against this grid. The feeling was that it was very useful that someone had done that comprehensive work, but also most people are very critical of it because it does feel very corporate, and in some ways some of the gradations of experience work very well, and some of them are rather laughable. So, and everything in between that. But at least it gives you a very elaborate checklist of different qualities that you might need, and different skills and experiences that you might want.
And what sort of benefits have come from taking the approach that you have and using sort of methodologies that you have?
Well, I mean, the idea of a portfolio, I mean, it sits very well anyway with people in art and design, used to the idea of a portfolio, of bringing together a series of different components that then you make a pattern out of and you reflect on. So it was and to get people moving on it with ideas that they would already have a lot of material. They probably have profiles, even up-to-date profiles in 3 or 4 different places, like an online profile, their own website, profiles that the university requires researchers to have a profile on the university website, and so on. So those different identities or ways that they configure themselves for various purposes so we asked them to put those sorts of things up, and then a sense of their practice. So or if they were entirely sort of theory-based researchers, still papers and publications and so on that they would have, and in a way the portfolio encouraged people to be more adventurous, to be more visual, to do that, for it to become quite bespoke in the way they use the links that are easily available across the pages in workflow.
Yes. What worked particularly well, and what worked possibly less well?
Well, I think I guess it's like many of these things. It depends on people's existing relationship with the technology and software when they come to it. I mean, some people. There's a whole spectrum, as I'm sure you know, that at one level people are very enthusiastic and engaged with it, and they love to play with it, and immediately they know what they're going to do, and they grasp the idea of workflow very quickly. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's people who really struggle with it, but throughout the course of a sort of 6-month period, they grow into it, many of them, and actually end up producing very interesting things. And it does give like any sort of, effectively they're producing a kind of website.
Yes.
And therefore the kind of ways that they start to understand the creativity with which you can use links and cross-reference things and so on. It's good.
What do they do with it afterwards?
Well, many of them want to retain a copy of it and use it, and as a basis, and get quite excited about it. I think also, of course, many of the colleagues who do this unit are researcher teachers. They still teach or run busy courses and so on. So it also is a way in which, by using this for their own purposes, they start to see how they can apply it and use it with students and so on, and encourage their own students to build e-portfolios with that software.
What would be your dream approach with something like this, if you had absolutely no restraints on how you were going to do it?
That's an interesting thought. I think as well that, thinking about it as a tool, because I remember when actually it was you who first introduced me to workflow and started to see what it could do, that you realise what a powerful research tool it is. Because I was very interested. I was on the verge of being part of a big research project that someone had invited me onto on my online profile, and it was across a number of different institutions. Sadly, it didn't take off, but it was a very social, outward-looking kind of project, and looking at different communities and how they could be they could be supported and helped to develop aspirations and so on. And it seemed to me that, so I was sort of slightly at a loss and thinking, well, I'm a documentary filmmaker, is one of my major skills, I suppose, and I could offer that up. And I noticed on the profiles of the people that already invited, there was already a couple of people who were down in that way, and I thought, well, actually sharing information and documents and the range of things that you can upload, anything that's a digital file can be uploaded to workflow and exchanged. So it can be videos, it can be sound, it can be all of those things. And so that it seemed to me that was quite an exciting prospect, and they were very keen on that. They got very keen on that, so they wrote that into the proposal. Sadly, it didn't pass muster with the research council, but it was. But it's always there. I think that in many ways, it's a very powerful tool that could be used more widely, I think.
And any other sort of reflections or thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I think it's interesting those different journeys that people have with the idea of a portfolio. Because I guess as soon as you grasp it, it appears a very simple and obvious thing. But to some people, it doesn't. And actually, it's quite a useful tool for getting people to understand how links work. That they aren't just some magical thing that you click with your mouse and things happen on the screen when you go to a kind of well-organised website that, in a sense, doesn't reveal the processes behind it very well, and the fact that it's sort of organised in the way that it is, and it's organised in these different kinds of pages, and it sort of to some degree opens that up and allows people to see that kind of structure and perhaps even have the confidence to build their own websites.
And any other things that I should have asked you and haven't asked you that you think I should?
Well, I think there's all. It's quite funny how different cohorts work with this, because there's been 6 or so cohorts have gone through. Yes. Sadly, the course isn't going to run in this form in quite the same way anymore. But it's interesting that how the enthusiasm or how coherent the portfolios have been is a reflection of how coherent the group works socially. In fact, it's quite interesting that some of them were very uneven, and you got people who just, did their thing, and one suspects that they could have, they could have had 2 hours with me and gone away and produced that portfolio because they already had the material and they already had the ideas and they were already very proactive as researchers and using all of those tools anyway. Whereas at the other end of that, there were people who were really a much earlier stage in recognising what a research identity could be for them and how their practice might fit into that and so on, that would be equally sort of troubled by what they saw as the challenge of developing these materials and uploading materials for workflow. And some of those really took flight, and others sort of floundered and just barely got through the course. But funny enough, the last cohort we had was really, they were really proactive people, really engaged and in face-to-face in the workshop sessions that we had. And it was reflected in the quality of the portfolios as well. So that was
excellent. James Swinson, thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for the opportunity. It's fun.